I'm not going to tell you who I am, my name, or what I do for a living because that's not important. What matters is what I experienced just 2 days ago. I'll only share what directly relates to that horror. My daughter and I live a modest life, not rich, but we get by. My husband drank heavily, and because of that, he's no longer with us. Recently, he passed away. And in a way, this story is about him. Actually, no, not exactly about him. Everything was normal for a while. We were an average family until Sergey, my husband, started drinking. I don't know why, but it started after his mother passed away, my mother-in-law. Maybe that's somehow tied to the story I'm about to tell. I'm not sure. As I mentioned, I live with my daughter Marina, who's 8 years old. One evening, after coming home from work, exhausted, I found Marina doing her homework, pretty much as usual. I tossed my bag on the hallway shelf, changed clothes, and went to the kitchen to reheat some leftover soup. I was starving. A couple of minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Strange, I wasn't expecting anyone, and it was already 8 p.m. Maybe it was the neighbors. I looked through the peephole, but all I saw was the empty landing and a flickering light bulb no one had bothered to change in years. God, what a place to live. Why was I unlucky enough to be born here? I assumed it was just some kids playing a prank, shrugged it off, and went to watch TV. But before I could grab the remote, there was another knock. Again, I looked through the peephole. Still, no one. I opened the door to check, but the hallway was empty. Weird. Was I hearing things? I dismissed it again, went back to the couch and started watching TV, trying to lose myself in my shows. The only thing that takes my mind off this dreary life. About 15 minutes later, there was another knock. Who could be doing this? I called out to Marina, asking her to see who was at the door. She came into my room, looking confused. "Mom, no one's knocking," she said. That was when I realized maybe I was just so exhausted from working 2 shifts that I was imagining things. I hugged Marina, wrapped her in a blanket, and we sat down to watch TV together. About an hour later, I put her to bed, told her a story, and lay down next to her. But soon after, I was startled awake by a loud bang, like the door had slammed shut. For a second, I thought it might be Sergey, back from work. But then I realized Sergey is dead. Who slammed the door? I grabbed my robe and rushed to the hallway. The door was wide open, even though I always lock it at night, with 2 locks no less. Not only was it unlocked, but it was completely open. That's when fear started creeping in, like tiny needles poking every inch of my body. I locked the door again, put Marina back to bed, and lay down beside her. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. What was that? I'm not a superstitious person. I don't believe in God, the devil, or anything mystical, but this felt at the very least strange. Eventually, around 7 a.m., I must have dozed off. It was Saturday, so Marina didn't have school, and I didn't have work. But when I woke up, despite sleeping for only 2 hours, I felt an overwhelming fatigue, like I had spent the whole night unloading trucks. I didn't want to get up, but I needed to. I had to make breakfast for my daughter. Dragging myself out of bed, I threw on my robe and headed to the kitchen. The first thing I noticed was a cup sitting in the middle of the table. You might think, so what? It's just a cup. But no, it was my late husband's cup. And here's the thing. I had thrown out all of his belongings after he died, every last item, to avoid thinking about him or remembering him. I was trying to start over. So, how did this cup end up here? What was going on? That's when real fear set in. My whole body was covered in goosebumps. I grabbed a cigarette, sat down at the table, and lit it up. My mind raced with thoughts, but none of them made any sense. I couldn't come up with a rational explanation for what was happening. My train of thought was broken when the cigarette burned down and scorched my finger. That snapped me back to reality. I had come to the kitchen to make breakfast. I tossed the cup into the trash and started cooking. The rest of the day passed in a blur of household chores: cleaning, laundry, cooking. That strange incident with the cup slipped from my mind, replaced by exhaustion from running around the house all day. Marina spent most of the day outside playing and came home just in time for dinner. We ate, I gave her my phone to watch something on YouTube, and I collapsed onto the couch, falling asleep almost immediately. It was around 8 or 9 p.m. when I drifted off, but again it didn't last long, maybe an hour or two. I woke up feeling thirsty and headed to the kitchen. Marina was still glued to the phone. I poured myself a glass of water, and after taking a couple of sips, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The cup. It was the same cup I had thrown away that morning. What in the world was going on? This wasn't funny anymore. I distinctly remembered throwing it out. Was something paranormal happening in this apartment, or was I losing my mind? I left the cup on the table, put Marina to bed, and went to my own room. My thoughts were a tangled mess. First, the door. Now, the cup. And on top of that, this constant, unexplained exhaustion. Was I getting sick? But no, I had checked my temperature earlier, and it was fine. With these thoughts swirling in my head, I somehow managed to fall asleep again. I slept surprisingly well that night. No more strange occurrences until the next morning. When I woke up, the door to the apartment was open again. And this time, there was something else. My late husband's belongings had started reappearing in the apartment. His sneakers were by the door, his jacket was hanging in the closet, and that same cup was back in the kitchen. What kind of sick joke was this? That evening, Marina developed a fever. She turned as pale as a ghost and refused to eat, though I wasn't eating much either. Something unexplainable was happening in this apartment. Marina's fever spiked to 102 degrees Fahrenheit, so I called an ambulance, and we spent the night at the hospital. I spent the night at the hospital, and the next morning I headed home to cook something for Marina, as the food they served there was barely edible. On my way back, I passed by a small church. As I walked by, a thought suddenly crossed my mind. Maybe I should go in. Like I said before, I'm not someone who believes in anything like that. But after everything that had been happening, I decided to stop by. I spoke with the priest, telling him about the strange occurrences in my apartment. He listened carefully and suggested that he could come by the next day to bless the apartment. I gave him my address, and feeling a little calmer, I headed home. When I got back to the apartment, there was nothing unusual. The exhaustion was still there, lingering, but it would fluctuate, sometimes worse, sometimes better. I noticed that the fatigue seemed to intensify when I was inside the apartment. Something about being in that space drained me. On top of that, I had a sinking feeling about the upcoming night. I don't know why, but I had this gut-wrenching dread about what might happen after dark. Despite the unease, I managed to prepare food for Marina. I dressed and left the apartment, heading back to the hospital. As I was leaving, I ran into our downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Elena Nikolaevna, a kind old woman who had lived in the building for years. "Svetlana, dear, can I talk to you for a moment?" she called out. "Hello, Nikolaevna. What's going on?" I asked. "Well, I hate to bother you, but there's something I need to say. I'm old, and I don't sleep well. But could you please not run around so much at night?" I understand you have a child, but the walls are thin, and I can hear everything. It's keeping me awake, she said. I stared at her, confused. What do you mean? We don't run around at night, Nikolaevna. People sleep at night. Besides, Marina has been in the hospital. Really? She said, her expression shifting slightly. Then maybe no one's slamming the doors either? The look on her face suggested she knew more than she was letting on. I didn't say another word. I turned around and walked away, her words echoing in my head. She had heard it too. It wasn't just in my head. But what were those footsteps? And who had been slamming the doors at night? We weren't even home that night. I couldn't get that question out of my mind as I made my way back to the hospital. When I arrived, the doctor gave me some unexpected news. Marina was fine. She had fully recovered and could go home that day. A wave of relief washed over me. I rushed into her room, and she ran into my arms. 30 minutes later, we were headed home. But as soon as our building came into view, all those dark thoughts about the apartment and whatever might be lurking inside flooded my mind again. I decided to stop by the church once more before heading home. The priest was just about to leave, but I managed to convince him to come bless the apartment that very day instead of waiting until tomorrow. I told him that something felt seriously wrong, and my sense of foreboding was growing stronger the closer I got to the building. I know you're probably thinking, why didn't you just move out? But where could we go? Marina and I have no one, no family, no friends. We had nowhere else to stay. The priest agreed to come with us, and the three of us headed to the apartment. As soon as we stepped inside, his face changed. He immediately pulled out his holy water, said a prayer, and quickly sprinkled the apartment. When he finished, he left in a hurry, saying only a few words as he went out the door. Move out. There's evil here. It won't be easy to get rid of. And no, it's not your husband visiting. Something else, something dark, is feeding on your fear and energy. I've done what I could, but I hope it helps. I stood there frozen. What was that all about? Evil? What kind of evil? But as I thought about it, I realized it all made sense. The fatigue, the fear. He said it was feeding on my fear and energy. That's why I was so drained all the time. And the fear, it was tied to my memories of Sergei. I had been afraid to think about him, and then his belongings started reappearing in the house. Chills ran down my spine, and my heart started racing. Where could I go? I had no money, no resources. And with winter approaching, I couldn't just leave. Marina was already sick. If we ended up outside, she'd only get worse. There was nothing left to do but stay in the apartment that night. After dinner, I tucked Marina into bed, took a shower, and set up the couch for myself. I fell asleep almost immediately, but around 2 a.m., something happened that's now burned into my memory as the scariest experience of my entire 35 years of life. Marina woke me up. She had gotten up to use the bathroom, and as she stood beside my bed, she asked me the question that still haunts me. Mom, who's sleeping next to you? I felt my blood run cold. Instantly, I was wide awake, and I could feel it. Someone was lying next to me. My fear was indescribable. I started trembling uncontrollably. Whatever it was lying right there, on my bed, next to me. In the mirror on my bedside table, I could make out its reflection. It looked like a person, but its face was pale, almost completely white. Its eyes and mouth were black. It was wrapped in a blanket, lying beside me, completely still. What in the world was that? I was paralyzed with fear. I quietly slipped out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest. It didn't move. It just lay there. I quickly got dressed, threw some clothes on Marina, and we silently left the apartment. Whatever that thing was, it didn't stop us or react. It either didn't notice us leaving, or it was letting us go. I don't know. I was shaking. Marina was crying. I had no idea what to do. We got outside, and that's when I saw something that completely broke me. From the window of our kitchen, I saw it. That creature, whatever it was, staring directly at me. It was watching us. The fear I felt in that moment was beyond words. I made a decision then and there. I would go to Elena Nikolaevna and ask for her help. I had nowhere else to turn. I spent about 10 minutes knocking on her door before she finally answered, her sleepy face showing concern as she invited us in. I explained everything that had just happened. She was a religious woman, and she believed me. She let us stay with her, at least for the time being. I knew I couldn't go back. I had to sell the apartment. I didn't care what it took. I couldn't live there anymore. Life at Elena Nikolaevna's place started to return to normal. Marina went back to school, and I resumed work. Things seemed to be looking up, until one night when I heard a knock on the front door. And then I heard it again, the sound of the door slamming shut.
If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Together we can take this channel to the next level, and don't forget to check out this video.